The following is a real, secretly recorded conversation of Martin Belly, who at the time was vice president at Campbell's, one of the biggest food companies in America.
We have shit for f***ing poor people. Who buys our shit? So healthy. Now that I know what the f*** in it, bioengineered meat. I don't want to eat a piece of chicken that came from a 3D printer. You?
When this recording went public, he was fired days later. Florida's Attorney General launched an investigation. Campbell's called his comments vulgar, offensive, and false. But I wanted to know, what does he and other big food executives know that we don't? So I did some digging, and what I found was bad. The steak you order at a restaurant can be made with glue, and they don't have to tell you. There are drugs in your pork that are banned in over 100 countries. There are ingredients in your food so toxic that when one of them spilled off a truck in Chicago, they evacuated half a mile and sent in a hazmat team. And it's gotten so out of control that lawmakers are now requiring companies to slap a label on your food that reads, "Not recommended for human consumption." So today I'm going to expose everything they don't want you to see. By the end of this video, you'll know every hidden ingredient, drug, and chemical to watch out for. And I'll give you 3 simple tricks so you can make sure that none of it ever ends up on your plate. Let's start with what's secretly being added to the food you buy every week. This is an enzyme called transglutaminase, but the meat industry knows it as meat glue. How it works is it bonds together cheap meat scraps into what looks like a premium whole cut. It's made through bacterial fermentation of a microbe. It is this fermentation that produces the enzyme we know as meat glue. It's also manufactured by Ajinomoto, the same company behind MSG and aspartame, 2 of the most controversial food additives in history. In 2021, a review published in the journal Toxins found that transglutaminase increases intestinal permeability, which really is just a fancy way of saying it pokes holes in your gut lining. Think of your gut lining like a coffee filter. It's supposed to let the good stuff through and keep the bad stuff out. When these holes form, undigested food, bacteria, and toxins slip straight into your bloodstream. Your immune system sees it and it panics. And this right here is what inflammation is. Russia banned it in 2020, but in the US and the rest of the world it's still legal. The FDA classified it as generally recognized as safe, under a system called GRAS. And remember that name, because this is the corrupt system we're going to break down soon, and it's how all of this ends up in your food. Now on packaged meat, it has to be labelled formed meat, so you don't have to worry about this when buying meat from stores, pending you read the packaging. But at restaurants, there is zero disclosure required. They have no obligation to tell you. Food safety attorney Bill Mahler said it plainly. Meat glue is used more than you think, and the meat industry isn't giving consumers the whole picture. And there's a major safety problem with this. When you take scraps of meat and glue them into one piece, if surface bacteria such as E. coli and Salmonella are present, they get folded into the center. Normally, searing the outside would simply kill any potential bacteria. But now, because of this meat glue, they're trapped inside. And because the meat looks like a normal cut, people get it cooked to medium rare. But by doing this, the meat never reaches the internal temperature it needs to kill what's hidden in there. This can lead to a serious risk of food poisoning, severe gut infections, and in serious cases, hospitalization. Then there's ractopamine. Ractopamine belongs to a class of drugs originally designed to open up the airways for asthma patients. But scientists discovered these drugs had a side effect. They also stimulated muscle growth. So the livestock industry, they decided to repurpose them. Ractopamine works by mimicking your body's stress hormones, which forces animals to convert feed into lean muscle much faster. It's fed to pigs in the final weeks before slaughter, and studies suggest ractopamine improves feed efficiency by roughly 10%, meaning the animal converts more of what it eats into muscle rather than fat. That translates to about 3 extra kilograms of lean muscle per animal. Multiply that across millions of pigs a year, and you're looking at a massive increase in profit. Even nowadays, a large percent of American pork is still raised with it in their final weeks before slaughter. The studies showing what this drug really does makes me really wonder how it ever got approved in the first place. And when you see who actually ran the safety studies, it gets even worse. The FDA based its decision to approve this drug on studies conducted by Elanco, the very same company that makes the drug. They studied their own product, and their studies didn't even focus on whether it was safe for humans, let alone animals. The only human study ever done involved just 6 healthy young men, and even in that tiny sample, 3 reported severe heart pounding. and one patient's heart began racing so bad that he had to be withdrawn from the study entirely. But even despite this, the FDA said, yep, no worries, and approved it. Since then, they have received over 160,000 formal reports of pigs getting sick or dying after being fed this drug. This included broken limbs, an inability to walk, heart failure, and even death. 160,000 reports. If 160,000 people complained about a restaurant on Google Reviews, that restaurant it wouldn't exist anymore. In fact, the entire building would probably be demolished. But the FDA gets 160,000 reports of pigs becoming severely ill and in some cases literally dying, and their response is essentially, okay, noted. In fact, Chris Berkey, a pig farmer from Coops, Indiana, says he quit giving ractopamine to his pigs after watching them turn purplish, shake, and die from heart attacks. And here's what should bother you. With most livestock drugs, there is a 2-week clearance period before slaughter, so the chemicals can leave the animal's body. However, with ractopamine, there's no clearance period. It's fed to pigs right up until the day they die. When Consumer Reports, an independent product testing organization, tested 240 products, they found ractopamine in 1 out of every 5. So 1 in every 5 pork products contains a drug that is literally giving pigs heart attacks. In fact, more than 150 countries have banned or restricted ractopamine. The EU, China, Russia, but in the US it's not even tested for in meat. Now the 3 biggest players in US meat sales, Smithfield, Tyson and JBS, have already walked away from it, but ractopamine is still legal, and it's still used by many other producers. Next up, we have the tactic which is the most deceptive of them all. The meat industry calls it modified atmosphere packaging, which really is just a nice way of saying, we're gassing your meat to hide its low quality and lack of freshness. Here's how it works. Carbon monoxide is injected into meat packaging. It binds to myoglobin, which is the protein in meat that gives it its red color. Once this binding occurs, it locks in that bright red color, essentially permanently. Due to this color enhancement, the meat stays looking fresh no matter how old it actually is. Now there are no studies done on humans that analyze how this affects our health, but what I do find concerning is the reason the EU gave when they banned it. Their scientific committee found that the colour can last beyond the actual microbial shelf life of the meat, which means the meat could be crawling with bacteria and still look perfectly fresh on the outside. At a congressional hearing in Washington, lawmakers displayed a piece of beef that was 2 years old. It still looked bright pink and fresh. At a separate hearing in Chicago, when a local official asked a Cargill executive, Cargill being one of the largest meat producers in the world, whether consumers have a right to know their meat is being treated with carbon monoxide, his response was, and I quote, "I don't think they would really care to know." I don't know about you, but I think I would care. The EU banned it, Japan banned it, Singapore banned it, but in the US and many other parts in the world, this is still legal. What I wanted to know was what percentage of US beef is treated with carbon monoxide, and what I found was worrying. The number isn't 10% or even 20%. Instead, the number is, well, we don't actually know. I looked everywhere, and no study or data exists at all for just how common this practice really is. One thing that is good to note, however, is that Walmart, Kroger, Publix, Stop and Shop, A&P, Wayman's, and Whole Foods have all publicly stated that they do not sell carbon monoxide treated meat. But it's still legal in the US, and there is still no clear labeling requirement that lets you reliably identify it on the shelf. So this is definitely something you gotta watch out for. Before we discuss the sneaky loophole that allows all of this to be legal, let me tell you about one other chemical that you need to hear about. It's called azodicarbonamide, and it might be the worst of the lot. This is a chemical used in yoga mats, shoe soles, and foam rubber. This one isn't actually in meat, but it's widely used in nearly 500 food products across 130 brands. The purpose of this chemical is to create air bubbles. In yoga mats and shoe soles, it makes the rubber foamy and spongy. In bread, it does the same thing. It conditions the dough so it rises higher and holds more air. But there's one story about this azodicarbonamide that really tells it all. In 2011, a truck carrying this stuff flipped on Chicago's Dan Ryan Expressway. The result? 2 residential towers were evacuated. One of the busiest highways in the city was shut down for hours. Firefighters on the scene were treated for chemical exposure. So when this stuff falls off a truck, they clear entire buildings, close highways, and send in hazmat teams. But when you put it in a loaf of bread and sell it at Walmart, They simply say, well, that'll be $4.99 please. There are two mechanisms that make this compound so toxic. The first is in its raw form. When a zodicarbonamide is exposed to heat or air, it decomposes rapidly and releases carbon monoxide, ammonia and nitrogen gas. This is what happened with the firefighters who had to be treated at the scene. The packages this stuff were in split open and ignited, but it is even more toxic in something like bread. You see, when you bake azodicarbonamide, like you do when you bake bread, it also breaks down. This forms two toxic byproducts: semicarbazide, which has been shown to cause cancer in mice, and urethane, which is a recognized carcinogen. The World Health Organization's cancer research arm has said urethane probably causes cancer in humans. Like many other ingredients on this list, azodicarbonamide is banned in the EU. And in Singapore, those guys, they ain't messing about with this stuff. In Singapore, using it in any food carries heavy penalties and even potential prison time. In the US, Subway only removed it in 2014, and that took a petition with 92,000 signatures just to make that happen. The FDA says it's under review, but it's still legal. So somehow, to this day, there is a chemical dangerous enough to shut down a major highway and force the evacuation of an entire apartment building. A chemical that's banned and criminally punishable for being sold in other countries. And yet somehow it's still sitting in bread on a shelf in the US. And the thing with toxic chemicals like these is it's not just in our food. The same problem runs right through the supplement industry. The most popular electrolyte brand online right now recently tested positive for lead, a forever toxin that stores in your body, and there is evidence to suggest that it may cause cancer. Gatorade uses synthetic dyes that are derived from petroleum. In fact, nearly all electrolyte brands use cheap salts contaminated with heavy metals, poor dosages that actually make symptoms worse, and extremely low quality ingredients. This matters because our bodies depend on electrolytes for how your cells hydrate, how your nerves fire, how your muscles contract. Without sufficient levels, your energy tanks, your focus disappears, and you get muscle cramps. Many people suffer from these issues, but they can't seem to work out why it's happening. Now, for many people, if you're eating high quality whole foods and adding a good amount of salt to them, you can avoid most electrolyte issues. But many people find they do much better supplementing on top of that, especially during high stress periods or if they're doing intense training. This is why I have partnered up with today's sponsor, Saltar. They are a small company built by someone from this community who got fed up with the same problems we've been talking about this entire video. What makes Saltar so great is their sourcing. They only use ingredients of the highest quality. Their unflavored version is just pure sea salt from unpolluted waters, which has been third-party tested for heavy metals, as well as potassium gluconate and magnesium glycinate, which are the best absorbed forms of potassium and magnesium. They are also dosed perfectly, which means your electrolytes stay balanced. I personally use the unflavored version, but they also have tart lime, grapefruit, and salted caramel coffee, which are lightly sweetened with stevia leaf. They even source their citric acid from real fruit, rather than the lab-grown mold version that most other companies use. So if you're looking for a good, high-quality electrolyte supplement, in my opinion, Saltar is by far the best. Their website is the top link in the description of this video. Thanks again to Saltar for making videos like these possible. Now, if I'm going to hold the food industry accountable, I do have to be fair all across the board. Let's go back to Martin Belli, the man heard in the clips at the start. Belli was a vice president who worked in Campbell's IT department, and he actually had no connection to how the food is actually made. Campbell's themselves said that his comments were, quote, patently absurd, and on the 3D printed meat, they're right. There is no 3D printed meat being sold. I can confirm that bioengineered 3D printed meat is not being sold to you, but here's what Campbell's did confirm. They said their products do contain bioengineered food ingredients. In fact, it's on the label. They say these refer to genetically modified crops like canola, corn, and soybean, but not the chicken. So the chicken is real, but everything else, that may not be. Martin's claims about printed meat may not be true, but when he says it's not healthy now they know what's in it, I think it's pretty fair to say that he is, well, spot on. So we have meat glue, a drug banned in 150 countries, a gas that makes rotten meat look fresh, and a chemical in our food that requires a HEMSAT team and a major evacuation zone when it falls off a truck. You're probably wondering the same thing as I was. How is any of this actually legal? The answer? It goes back 68 years, to one very specific day. The date is September 6th, 1958. President Eisenhower is in the final stretch of his second term. The Cold War is at its peak, and inside the White House, a quiet decision is being made that would forever change the food we eat. That day, Eisenhower signed something called the Food Additives Amendment, and buried inside it was a system called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. The original idea behind this was actually very reasonable. Things like salt, vinegar, flour, pepper, ingredients humans have used for centuries. They didn't need to go through a formal FDA approval process. So already fine, this makes sense. But here's where it goes wrong. They included a massive loophole. It said that companies could determine on their own that an ingredient was, quote, generally recognized as safe, and that this didn't require telling the FDA, without independent testing, and it didn't even require someone to check their work. For decades, there was nobody that abused this, but one day the food industry, they realized what they had. Since the year 2000, the vast majority of all new food chemicals were approved through the self-certification system, not by the FDA, but instead by the companies themselves that sell the foods. A 2013 study looked at 451 of these GRAS safety determinations and found that every single one, all 451, relied on expert opinions from either manufacturer employees or consultants hired by the manufacturer themselves, with zero independent review. And it gets worse. If the FDA actually raises concerns about an ingredient, the company can withdraw its GRAS notice, hire their own contractor to recertify it, and put it right back in your food. Imagine school worked the same way. You could just fail a test and your teacher's like, you know what, don't worry about it, mate, just take it home, mark it yourself. I can't imagine we'd have a flourishing society if we could all do that, but anyway. Another loophole that is used is labels like natural flavors, natural colors, or spices. When a company puts labels like these on their product, the FDA, let alone you or I, has no idea what's actually in it. Now, RFK Jr. actually directed the FDA in March of 2025 to do what it can to close this loophole. The FDA proposed a rule in September of 2025 requiring companies to file mandatory notices. But right now, as I'm making this video, that loophole is still open. This rule hasn't gone through, so all of these sneaky tricks, they're still being exploited. Now look, I want to be straight with you. For most people, avoiding the meat glue, the ractopamine, the CO packaging, and the azodicarbonamide is actually pretty simple. And I'm going to show you exactly what to do at the end of this video. It's not that complicated. But first, I need to show you what's actually happening because of all of this. For the first time in history, something is actually being done. And the food industry, they are getting what they deserve. On June 22nd of 2025, Texas signed Senate Bill 25 into law. It requires a warning label on any food containing any of 44 specific ingredients. The warning reads, "This product contains an ingredient that is not recommended for human consumption by the appropriate authority in Australia, Canada, the European Union, or the United Kingdom." The list includes ingredients like red 40 and yellow 5, which are artificial dyes contaminated with benzodiazepine, a known human carcinogen. A 2023 study found that red 40 causes DNA damage and triggers inflammation in the colon. These are in Skittles, Doritos, Gatorade, and Fruit Loops, as well as titanium dioxide, a whitening agent used in paint and sunscreen. It's in coffee creamers, frostings, and chewing gums. Potassium bromate's also there, a flour additive that has caused kidney tumors in animal studies. It's actually banned in the EU, UK, Canada, and Brazil, but it's still in cheap white bread and rolls in the US. And the punishment for not doing this is very severe. There is a fine of up to $50,000 per day, per product, if this label is not on the product. To me, the fact that they're doing this is really crazy. These are ingredients that have been in our food for decades. Ingredients that the FDA has told us were safe. Ingredients most people have probably eaten, I don't know, thousands of times. And now states are putting labels on these same foods saying not recommended for human consumption. In a way, they're essentially admitting that they've been poisoning everyone. The food companies do actually appear to be very scared by all of this. White House advisor Kelly Means confirmed it was the single most lobbied against bill in Texas in 2025. The food industry spent more money fighting this than anything else. That right there tells you everything you need to know. That tells you this bill, it might actually do something. In fact, they didn't even stop at just lobbying. In December of 2025, the American Beverage Association, the Consumer Brands Association, the National Confectioners Association, and FMI filed a federal lawsuit. And you'll never guess what their argument was. I could give you 1,000 guesses at this and you wouldn't get it. They are arguing that by having to put this label on their food, it is in breach of their First Amendment right to, get this, freedom of speech. Can you imagine that court case? Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff argues that not being allowed to poison the entire population without telling them is in breach of their First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Now, as ridiculous as this argument sounds, a judge has actually temporarily blocked the law from being enforced. A preliminary injunction has actually been granted. Now, this doesn't mean that the companies won. It just means that the case has been paused. But assuming the companies don't win, which, you'd like to think is the case, the law's effective date for labels is January 1st of 2027. The fight is far from over, and it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. And Texas actually isn't alone in this. Louisiana has taken a slightly different approach. Instead of printing the warning label directly on the package, they're requiring QR codes you scan with your phone. When you scan this QR code, you get to see which flagged ingredients are inside. This is effective January of 2028. Indiana, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Mississippi, and even Maryland all have similar bills proposed or in session. And here's the even better news. Companies are already reforming, before the law even takes effect. In December of 2025, PepsiCo launched Simply NKD, versions of Doritos and Cheetos that contain no artificial dyes and no artificial flavors. The same taste but colorless. Kellogg's has also committed to removing food colorings by 2027. Kraft Heinz, Hershey, and Tyson have all also made verbal commitments to reformulate. Now, this is obviously definite progress, but it still doesn't change the fact that these chemicals have been everyone's food for decades. We know they're, for lack of a better word, screwing us, but here's what you can actually do about all of this. These are 3 simple rules to make sure you aren't consuming any of this poison. First rule is a very simple one. Buy foods with only one ingredient. There's no loophole with this where they can sneak in added ingredients. The GRAS system, the meat glue, the CO packaging, the fillers, none of this stuff can touch you when there's nothing to hide behind. Steak and eggs certainly does not need GRAS approval. The system with all its loopholes only works when there's an ingredient list long enough to bury things in. Rule 2 is simply to choose better stores. Whole Foods, Kroger, and Publix have all publicly stated they do not use carbon monoxide packaging. They are doing this even without a federal ban that requires them to do so. That right there tells you something. Some retailers choose to set standards that are above the FDA's minimum, whereas there are many others that do whatever they can get away with. So look for stores that publish clear sourcing and packaging policies. Rule 3 is to go local when you can. A local butcher knows the farm. Your local butcher, assuming he's a top bloke, will be able to tell you if there's any shenanigans going on. With local sourcing, there is no industrial supply chain that big corporations can hide behind. So there's going to be none of the sneaky tricks we've discussed today going on with your food. The shorter the distance between the farm and your plate, the fewer hands your food passes through. And there are fewer chances for someone to add something that you never asked for. And look, I get it. Not everyone has access to a local butcher or a farmer's market. But even if you're buying supermarket meat with some additives, it's still much better than ultra-processed junk. The simplest thing you can do today, and for free, is to simply flip the package over and read the ingredients. If there's only one, you're good to go. States are fighting back, companies are reformulating, the consumers, they're waking up, and the food labels, they're coming whether the food industry likes it or not. The system that let all of this happen is starting to crack. Tough day for big food, they're in the trenches. Now, one thing I do want to note, however, is that in many cases you are being ripped off by grass-fed beef. Grass-fed beef is often 2 or more times the price as grain-fed beef. But guess what? Some grass-fed beef has come from cows that have never eaten a single blade of grass in their entire lives. And yes, it's completely legal. There's another one of these GRAS loopholes in the labeling of grass-fed beef that most people don't know about. So if you want to make sure you're actually getting what you're paying for when you buy grass-fed beef and not being essentially scammed by some marketing trick, then you will find this video right here interesting. In it, I break down the whole grass-fed scam that's going on. Anyway, as always, great speaking with you, and I'll see you next time.